Happy Monday. Coming to you today from my house, which means you might hear some kids running around in the background. So sorry if any of that noise does come through. This week we begin a new series looking at discipleship, and we spent this past Sunday defining discipleship together. So there were a bunch of different texts that we looked at from all over the Bible. So I won't reiterate all of those. But the big plan that I kind of wanted to just share with you guys is we are now, so the church, the Christians, believers today, are the means God has chosen to accomplish His eternal plan. And I think we forget that so often. We often end up just focusing on ourselves and our own approaches to things, and at times even just make Christianity all about like self-improvement or getting better, or sometimes even the worst possible way of this is like taking what we already do and then supposedly redeeming it by saying like putting a Jesus stamp on top of that. And the reality is God has invited us to be His actual hands and feet into the world, to be representatives about Him everywhere we go. And I think we at times just forget that. So like one of the things that I've often talked about in a way that you can practically live this out is like when you go to a restaurant, tip well. Because God is generous to us. He has been generous to us, so we can therefore be generous to other people. One of the things that I've intentionally tried to do is like, it's amazing to me is that if you walk around like stores, so if you go to Mall of America or even at Menards today, how few people will actually look you in the eyes. Like everyone has a tendency to look down, and so like I just try to smile at people and make eye contact with them anywhere I go. Maybe at times it's skipping the self-checkout line and going to a real person to check out so you can talk to them and be an encouragement to them. Another way of this is just be a good neighbor. I read the Jeremiah 29:5-7 passage where it talks about like all these things that we're supposed to do, and even in that context, one of the things that has stood out to me is he says plant vineyards, plant gardens, and then eat their fruit, which means you're going to be there for a long time. You plan to bear a harvest of the fruit that you are planting sometime in the spring. Now, one of the things that I mentioned I was going to be talking about today is what do we do when we as Christians are labeled intolerant or bigots for speaking and claiming to believe in the truth. Like there's not an easy answer to this. Like there's a story recently that has been making the rounds, and I listened to a sermon from this pastor in Australia, whose elder chair was actually promoted to the CEO of a football club. Again, this is in Australia. And then someone in the media found a sermon from this church in 2013 where the pastor preached on the problems of homosexuality. So news was published, and within 24 hours from the time the CEO was given this new job, he was given a choice of either continuing as the CEO, or which meant he would have to resign from being an elder of this church, or he had to leave the church and then he could remain the CEO. He chose to step down, which may become increasingly common in our world today. But at the end of the day, I think we need to realize that the message, the commitment, the way of life that Christians are called to has not changed. Even as Christianity is increasingly being pushed to the margins, that's okay. We need, in the midst of that, we need to commit to each other. We need to double down our efforts on evangelism and then ensure we're making and maturing disciples of Jesus Christ. Like that's some of what I'm trying to communicate with this message is this sermon series is the message that God has chosen, the vehicle God has chosen to bring about and spread the gospel message has not changed since Jesus ascended. Like first century Christians didn't have much influence over anything, but they lived radically different lives to the world around them. Now, another thing that I have talked about before, I don't know if I've talked about it here or in a sermon, but one of the things I've been contemplating recently is a philosophical idea known as the transcendentals, and that is like things that exist above anything else. So they are truth, beauty, and goodness. And one of the things that I was trained in as I was growing up is the true aspect of Christianity. Because if Christianity exists above everything else, then it's going to be true, beautiful, and it's going to be good. So like the apologetics primarily, when I was growing up, was trained in the truth aspect. Like if we can defend Christianity, then we're going to be able to argue people into becoming believers. And that is true. Like Christianity is true. There are legitimate intellectual beliefs that we can understand, reasons to believe the things that we do as Christians, but that is not in and of itself the only evidence we have for being a Christian. Christianity is also beautiful and good. And I think as I was growing up, that piece was underemphasized in the church. So like the example that I always talk about with this is when I was growing up in youth group, every youth group I would visit would have a poster on the wall that said, if you like this secular band, you should listen to this Christian alternative. And generally, the Christian alternative to the secular band was just a cheap knockoff of whatever the primary secular band is. On top of that, you could also tell anytime a new secular band started getting hot, a Christian like alternative option to that secular band would suddenly pop out of the blue as an attempt to try to make more money off of this new craze. So I think we as Christians need to double down on doing things, everything that we're called to do to the best of our ability, because God is the author of everything that is true, beautiful, and good. So look for spaces and ways that you can do and be the best possible employee, the best possible neighbor, the best possible citizen. That's what God has actually called us to do and be. I think we need to actually live those things out. So what does it mean to have a Christian marriage? Means two imperfect, sinful people coming together, yet living in forgiveness, making disciples together, training other people, opening up their home, being welcoming, being inviting. Like it's living a normal human life, but with the mark of Jesus permeating everything that you do, letting God's word, as Colossians 1 reminds us, dwell in us richly. So that's a few things that I want to talk about today. Next week, we're going to be looking at the content of discipleship, and that is, how do we speak God's word to each other? Colossians 1, 16 and 17, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another. What does that look like? How do we do that? And then there's a few other, hold on, I'm just going to look up what the rest of the sermon series is going to be. Give me 1 second. So this week was defining discipleship. Next week is the content of discipleship. After that, we're going to look at the idea of imitating me. After that, we'll talk about the assembly, the gathering on Sunday morning, how we use that to make disciples. And finally, we'll look at the idea that we need to do this informally and formally. And that will get us all the way up to Christmas. If you have any questions about anything I'm talking about, if there's things that were confusing or unclear, feel free to reach out to me. The books I recommended yesterday were The Trellis and the Vine Project. And if anyone wants the 2-page summary of the Trellis and the Vine, let me know and I will easily send you that summary. Hope you guys are doing well and hope that you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Lord willing, we'll see you on Sunday morning.